Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. We are so glad that you're with us tonight. The water crisis in Flint is dominating the headlines, from friction between the state and city over replacing the pipes, to the staggering price of water the city was paying even before this happened, to the governor agreeing to testify in Washington. We are putting it in perspective for you tonight. Also coming up, the State House unveils its proposal to reform Detroit public schools. It delays local control and takes on teacher sickouts. We'll see how this compares to the Senate's plan. Plus, a new report on Michigan charter schools that brings up the argument of holding authorizers accountable for academic performance. And new plans for the Detroit riverfront. You'll hear from Mark Wallace, the CEO of the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, for more on how the public can give their ideas for this next phase of development. That is all coming up for you tonight on MiWeek. But we do start in Flint with the governor's plan to replace the pipes and how it's not in line with the mayor, and a closer look at the future challenges Flint faces in terms of property tax issues and foreclosures. So let's bring in our MiWeek contributors. You know Nolan Finley of the Detroit News. He's here with us tonight, and filling in for Stephen this week is Free Press columnist Nancy Kaffer. Nancy, it's always good to have you back here on MiWeek.
Well, it's always wonderful to be here.
All right, guys, let's get started, and we'll start with the story that we've been starting now for the past, I think, month and a half, which is Flint. This week we saw a lot of friction, I think, Nolan, let me start with you, between the governor and the mayor. You had the governor coming out saying, well, we have a process about in terms of replacing some of these lead service lines, which they still can't quite find all of them. But you have the mayor saying, forget it, we need to go full speed ahead on my plan. How is the differentiation between the two? What kind of problems are they creating here?
Well, I think the first step has to be figuring out where the lead pipes are, and they haven't done that yet. And so, we had a story on the front page this morning. 7% or 720 homes are still showing high lead levels. Mark Edwards, the Virginia Tech professor, described the system as healing itself, but it would seem to me like those 720 homes that are showing high lead levels would be good targets, a good place to start the lead pipe replacement. After that, I think they need to look and see whether replacing all the rest of the pipes is necessary or whether this recoating process is going to work. It's going to be a long process either way, and I think right now in the beginning, taking the time to get it right. I mean, there is a little concern based on the Washington, D.C. experience of going in there and tearing up pipes that you might put more lead in the environment than you otherwise had.
Nancy?
And this is what Mark Edwards, the Virginia Tech professor, has warned about, is that if you disturb a lead pipe to replace it, it's going to shake more lead particles loose and they'll flow downstream into the system. So you really need to know where those pipes are, have a good location of where they're mapped, and a plan for how you're going to replace them so as not to make the problem worse. However, I understand that for the mayor who's living in the city and who has residents who still can't drink their water, it was in October that the state acknowledged that there was a problem. We're going on what, 6 months here of 5 months of not being able to use the water. I understand that for the mayor, this is something that is an incredible urgency, and she wants to see action, but it's important that the fix not make the problem worse.
Yeah.
Okay, so but then you have, though, a bit of a disconnect, though, because she's saying by any means necessary, we need to get this done. She is having workers that are coming in from Lansing to train other workers starting next week. So there, again, there's this disconnect between what the state is saying should happen and what she's saying, no, I want to make this happen.
Which is, I think speaks to one of the bigger problems here, is that the people in Flint have no faith in anything that the state tells them, and at this point they shouldn't. They were told for months and months their water was fine, and now of course it wasn't fine, and now we find out that there were all these internal emails of folks talking about how it wasn't, that they knew that problems were being brought up and not addressed. So, I think that what Dr. Edwards has said and what a lot of the literature indicates is that, like I said, the system will heal itself, that this chemical will come back in and recoat the inside of the pipes, which is what will keep the lead out. But will people in Flint ever be confident in that? Will they ever really believe that this water is safe, and what can be done to assure them of that? Because they're not going to trust stuff the state tells them, and that is a huge a disconnect, like you said, between I don't know how we start to repair.
I think it's helpful that he is the one that is making that statements, because I think that there is a trust level for him. But Nolan, what does the governor do in terms of sitting down with the mayor and saying, look, we have to get on the same page here, because he needs people from Flint to buy into whatever his plan is. And if she's saying, look, I'm going to go to the national press, I'm going to start some kind of crowdfunding, I'm going to get every celebrity in the world to come in here to do my plan, you've got a problem.
And that doesn't necessarily fix the problem. We've been urging for weeks now that that everybody, they need some sort of summit with local, state, the EPA, the congressional delegation. Everybody needs to sit down and agree on a unified strategy to fix this instead of pulling in a lot of different directions and everybody sort of pressing their own agenda. This will get done faster. There's a lot of resources available if people would sit down and say, look, here's the best strategy. I don't know if we figured that out yet. I think the outside experts, as you said, are critical to that. They have more credibility. Let's ask them what needs to be done and then follow a plan as quickly as possible.
Okay, so you say bringing in federal and everything. Will that help then when the governor says, yes, now I'm going to go to Washington and I'm going to testify in front of congressional hearings?
And that's a problem, because normally, like, let's say a hurricane hits your state, the governor is going to get information from all of the folks on the ground level, first responders, take it up to the next level, say, here's our ask, here's what we need. Because of the state's role in this crisis, the governor can't be that person who speaks with authority about what's happening and what's needed. His credibility has been deeply damaged by this. So there's a vacuum where that one person who can make this coordinated ask of federal officials, of state and local, I mean, that's a problem, and I don't really know how we get past that.
So what do you make of the governor saying, you know what, I am going to testify in Washington? What do you think that will do for him? What do you think that might hurt him?
Well, his plan is to go down there and get a bigger conversation started about infrastructure, because as we're seeing, as more places because of Flint are starting to test their water, we're seeing that this lead problem and other problems with the water isn't just an isolated incident. I mean, you have high lead levels in some areas of Detroit. Is that water? Is that dust? Does it matter? We've got to start addressing that problem. And all over the country, you have these issues. All over the state of Michigan, you've got issues with the infrastructure. And I think going down there and at least trying to talk about that and what's our national plan to fix our infrastructure, our water infrastructure in this country is essential.
Well, and he's absolutely right. We have these problems everywhere. We haven't invested in our infrastructure. We've kind of, it's easy not to care about it because you can't see it, and everything seems to be working fine. We haven't put the money into maintaining our infrastructure that we should have. This is all over the place. We know we have lead paint in homes all over the state. We don't have enough money going into abating that. But I think the risk for the governor here is that and it's a conversation that needs to happen, but I think the risk for the governor is that by going and trying to start this bigger conversation, it can look like he's trying to dodge. I think that's the risk for him here.
All right, Nancy, I want to talk about something that you wrote earlier this week about Flint, and we're talking about the water, we're talking about infrastructure, but down the road, taking a look at what's going to be happening to the city in terms of property taxes, in terms of what these homes are going to be valued at, in terms of what kind of revenue you're going to be able to get for this city, or is it just going to be spiraling back towards some kind of emergency management because you won't have the funding to run the city because you don't have the property tax?
So emergency management is only a Band-Aid. An emergency manager can come in, they can make cuts, they can consolidate services. They can't make new revenue happen. And that's what we've seen in cities all over the state that have done multiple stints in emergency management. You can't change the basic conditions. And the theory is that if you balance the budget and make it a better place to live, eventually more people will come there. That's a slow process. So the thing in Flint is twofold. 1/3 of the property in Flint is vacant. Either it's an empty lot or it's a derelict abandoned house. 1/3, right? So that's already a lot. So, the Genesee County Treasurer, the Executive Director of the Genesee County Land Bank, they're expecting to see an increase in the number of properties that get tax foreclosed related to this crisis. They don't know how many, but they're pretty sure that this is going to spike. So that's one problem. You're adding already to the blight and the vacancy in a city that has a huge problem with it. But in the short term, you're talking about 20% of the city's revenue comes from property taxes. What kind of, the city's got a deficit. How much of a hit to their revenue base can they take before we start to get into even more serious trouble? And this is something the state needs to be talking about, how they're going to help Flint stay afloat here.
And then that is got to be also part of the solution as well, Nolan.
Yeah, I would disagree with one thing. Emergency managers can create new revenue, as they did in Detroit, by resolving the debt. That freed up $175 million a year, which wasn't significant in Detroit public schools. If this bailout ever passes legislature, and I know we're going to talk about
Which
it,
is coming up
that's
next.
$1,000 a student, so they can create more revenue.
They can restructure costs so that there's more. They can free up revenue, but they can't create new revenue in terms of building the tax base by bringing in new residents, new businesses.
That takes growth, and that takes something.
Exactly.
We may have a situation in Flint that's similar to the whole Love Canal incident of decades ago where the town just over time just withers and dies.
Well, because you're going to want to know who's going to want to move there, who's going to start a business there, and those are a lot of the big questions.
The expectation is, you can appeal your property tax assessment when you get it, right? If you feel it's too high, you feel it was. The expectation is that a lot of people in Flint are going to appeal their property tax assessments when they come out this year and they're going to get those
why wouldn't you?
adjustments made
Yeah,
because how
yeah.
can you?
And is there any real estate transactions even going on in Flint? I mean, how are you going to accurately assess that property? If you can't sell it, is it worth anything?